Welcome back to part 2 of my Bronco Roadster build. We were able to get a little more work done since the end of the last video, which if you stuck around to the end of the video, you'll notice that right before finishing up that day, I was able to get the windshield to work. Which is something I'm very happy about. It took about an hour and a half of just trying different ideas to make it work, because what's tricky about this model is that the hood actually comes up quite a bit at the end here. It kind of slopes up. So you can't just make a windshield that folds. You have to have a windshield basically that slides up and then turns and then slides down. And that's how you get it to work correctly. So I was able to do this hinge with paper clips that allowed the windshield to kind of pull up a little bit, fold, and then push back down. So that was the big success there. Then since then, I basically focused on finishing up the chassis. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that. We'll take all these off. And here's what the chassis is looking like. So first thing that I did is I decided to swap out the front springs for some real springs. So this, find the focus again. Here we go. So as you can see here, these are real metal coils that I did using just regular jewelry wire that I picked up. This is actually a pretty heavy gauge, so it's actually really firm. And then I just took my drill, put a metal rod in there that was a good diameter, and just spun it around, and that's how you make the coils. And I'm very happy with these because they're actually quite firm, so you don't have to worry about them taking any load, which, you know, the tiny little spring, the shock absorbers here, those could easily bend if there was too much load on the axle. So these are perfect. Then in the rear, so I'll go ahead and quickly share a little tip that I have when it comes to working on models. And if you're looking for reference material, the website Bring a Trailer, which if you don't know, which I would assume most people do, it's a website that's commonly known for selling cars for way more than they're worth. But in actuality, it's a marketplace that people can list their usually harder to find or desirable cars. And one of the cool things about the website is that they require a ton of photos for the listing. So you can go on there and, you know, I was looking for photos of a stock Bronco chassis. And so I went on there, searched a U15 Bronco, because that's what they have the most of. That's the full hard top, not the half cap, not the Roadster. Roadster is a U13, half cap is a U14, full top's a U15. But I looked at the U15s, and I looked for stock examples, so either barn find, all original, low mileage, all that kind of stuff. And you can find some that their listing will have 150, 200 some odd photos on there. So if you ever need a good photo reference, that's where I go. So I went on there to look at how the chassis on these are put together, and I noticed that the kit comes with 4 rear shock absorbers. You would have the rear shocks here, and then you have a front shock that mounts up here and comes down. All the examples that I was looking at that were stock, or at least appeared stock, did not have front shocks. So I decided to take them off. I cut the post off here and just ran with the rear shocks. Maybe that's wrong? I don't know. But that's what I'm going with. And another kind of interesting thing, what am I trying to say? I noticed something a bit weird about this kit, which maybe I did something wrong, but these shocks did not seem long enough. I actually had to go in here and bend this piece here where the lower mounting tab, and actually bend it down in order for it to fit onto the axle. So I don't know if I did something wrong. They were not directional. There was no difference between front and rear. So I don't know. Just a weird quirk, I guess. So I did end up having to do that in order to get the shocks to mount correctly. And the final thing I did on the chassis that is not stock is, I'll throw a photo on here, but the fuel tank is not fully molded. So when you're looking from the underside of the model, there's this big gap between the fuel tank and the body. So what I went ahead and did was added some styrene, built up this wall here, and just kind of sanded it a little bit. I got to go in here and sand this a bit more to make it smooth. But that closed up the gap, so if you were looking from the underside of the model, you don't have that gap. And then I also did a little bit there on the front, just built that up as well. So little things that aren't really obvious and probably won't be noticed, but these are the kind of things that make me happy. So that's pretty much it for the chassis. The body did get a little bit of work done. First off, I mentioned this in the last video, but with this Roadster conversion, you do have to patch this gap right here where the interior kind of comes up, and they don't intend for you to have the doors off this thing. So if you're doing a doorless or a Roadster conversion, you'll have to patch that with a bit of styrene. Super simple. And then I did get the bed put together, so it's now in there. It's a separate piece still. But here's the bulkhead that divides up the pickup truck. And yeah, not really too much to say there. And I guess the final thing I have to update is I went ahead and painted up the saddle. So this is a file for an English saddle that I found. Do some modifications on it in order to actually give it some depth. I don't know what was up with this file, but it had just no substance to it. I think it was made for, it's one of those files where they're made for video games, so it's just a mesh and there's no structure to them. So I had to convert it to an STL, and I had to, really thicken this thing up in order to give it some structure. And then I designed these little stirrups here, and then I used painter's tape for the stirrup leathers. And so did all that up. And that will be sitting on the bedside of the Bronco. Like so. So that's pretty much where we're at right now. And that's probably where I'm going to be at for a while, because I know I've mentioned this a lot. I'm hyping it up, I guess. But I have an engine that's supposed to be coming in the mail for me soon. A good friend of mine is hooking me up with something very cool. And I need that in order to figure out the engine mounts, and then that's pretty much the last bit I have to do before paintwork. So if I really get antsy, maybe I'll spray some paint on the body, but I don't know, I don't really need to do that until the engine comes. I do have some aftermarket seats, which, not much to look at in this current state, but I believe I'll have to remove the seat mounts here in order to fit those, so that'll give me something to do. But yeah, that's pretty much where we're at for now, and I have a few more little parts that I'm 3D designing. I went ahead and designed a winch controller for this. I did look into doing a Pt.2 winch. I believe I mentioned that towards the end of my last video. And it's just a little hard to find reference material for them. And having to run the Pt.2 shaft, it just kind of became a little bit more work than I wanted to do. So I think I'm just going to stick with the electric winch. And so I did up the winch controller, so that's going to go underneath the dash. And then I also want to do something with the trailer hitch, which I mentioned in the last video. I don't know what they were thinking, or maybe what their intentions were with this trailer hitch. But from the top, it looks like your standard 2-inch receiver. But from the side, it's flat, so it almost looks like a tow bar. but I don't really know what it is because I've looked and I did a little bit of research. I'm going to do more of that, but it seems like these did have kind of a tow bar style hitch from the factory, and then they had the ball that would bolt onto there, but they were typically kind of more rounded, where this really does look like a 2-inch receiver because it has this little flange around the side here. Now I have some tube styrene, and I was considering just doing a 2-inch receiver, but I want to keep this old school, so I'm going to do some research and see if I can actually replicate the factory style trailer hitch. So that'll be another thing that I have to detail or design out for this. But that is pretty much it. So thanks for checking in, and I'll have another updates for you hopefully soon. Bye.